Roosters, and welcome back to another video. Today we're going to be starting a new series about me trying to create a homemade trading card game, or a trading card game made by me. Throughout the years I've tried my hands at this many times, but ultimately the result is the same. Whether I liked the idea or got bored of it, I never end up finishing the card game, or rather, when I mean that, I mean bring it to a stage in which I can actually have cards in my hands of some decent quality, play with my friends, and show it off to my family. Ultimately, I always end up giving up on the card game before it gets to past like basic idea stage. So in this series we're going to start with creating a new idea. We're going to work through creating new different concepts and art, and we're going to do testing, and we're going to do different sorts of brainstorms in video form or in a video form so I can show you guys my thought process when creating a card game. And the main goal is not to create a card game that is super fun or great, but create one that actually is in some sort of finished form. Then I can say this card game has been created at the very least. Without wasting too much time, let's get into the first episode. And this episode is going to be strictly about coming up with the idea I want to use for my card game. Ultimately, when you're creating your card game, there's three different things you want to figure out before you even start. You want to figure out what type of design space you want the card game to be in. You want to figure out the different theme for the card game, that being the lore or just the feel you want people to get from looking at the cards. And then finally, you want to decide what your scene is going to be. What type of players do you want to attract? Collectors, young, old, like a family type game, or do you want to do something more competitive or serious? I think these three things, design, theme, and scene, are absolutely important to designing a new card game. And so we're going to talk about these three things mainly in today's video. The first of the three elements to creating a new card game, design space, is something that I think most people are focused on more than anything else. And I think that's not a bad thing necessarily, but I think some people focus on it a little too much. That being said, I do have a couple ideas that I want to put in the card game, and I think it's important that when you choose these different design elements that you want in your card game, you hold fast to them. You don't choose different design elements, and then as you create more elements to the card game and you start to build the card game, you add so many elements. What I've done in the past, and what it ends up doing is that you lose a lot of the original game that you set out to create, and in the end it becomes something completely and utterly unrecognizable. So I have three different design elements I want to hold fast to in this card game. And there's three design elements. They're not all exactly specific mechanics that I want to put in the card game, but there are different elements that I want to put in there, and I don't want to let it get lost in the rest of the design. Whatever else other mechanics or different ideas I add to the card game, I don't want these three design elements to get lost. So the first one is going to be, I want it to be a dueling card game. And now, if you don't know what I mean by a dueling card game, I don't know if this is a term that a lot of people use, but it's a term I've always used to describe this type of card game. And that is, the idea is that I have a singular character, you have a singular character, 1v1. We pick a character when we're building our decks. We build decks full of attacks and like blocks and different things to help that one character defeat your one character. Obviously, a popular example of this could be Universus, a card game that I talk about on my channel a bit. But another popular, and probably the most popular card game that features this sort of mechanics or this design space, is going to be Flesh and Blood. Probably one of the most popular card games that uses design throughout the entirety of card game history. And so I want this to be in there, and although it's very broad, it's not a specific mechanic, but putting that down there is very important because it is going to decide a lot of how the rest of the card games end up going to be. So that's the number one thing I want to play, or rather want to be in the card game. The second mechanic is I want to have some sort of stamina mechanic. When you see a lot of fights, and a lot of one-on-one fights, especially between two people, you have to realize is that it's not like the way card games are usually portraying them. I don't have health, and then I have a certain set of resources. My resources and my health are sort of one and the same. If I run out of stamina, I lose. That's being KO'd. But also I need stamina to do my different attacks. If I want to punch you, if I want to punch you really fast, I'm going to need a lot more stamina than if I'm going to throw slow punches. And as such, in real life, the idea of health and resources are sort of mixed into one, where in card games they're usually two very separate mechanics. So that I wanted to put in the card game, and I think I have a really good idea of how I'm going to implement that into the dueling card game. But the whole point is that your life and your resource system is one and the same. And this one's a little more sort of vague in the way I might end up doing it, but this is going to be, I want the card game to have a sort of balance mechanic. And I don't mean like, oh wow, I don't mean balancing like you may originally think, keeping cards from getting too powerful. I want this idea that when you're playing the game, you have two separate things that you want to keep equal as close as you can. And you want to try to manage these two things, resources of some kind that are end up going to decide how you're going to play the game. But at the same time, it's not I'm going to boost this one element and then this other element I'm not going to worry about. I want there to be an urgency of balancing these two elements. And like I say, it sounds very vague. It doesn't really make a lot of sense because I'm not really exactly sure how I'm going to proceed with this idea, though I do have a pretty strong idea of how I want to. But the point is that that's a sort of idea that I want to be putting into the card game that I don't see in a lot of card games like at all. They don't really encourage this idea that I want to balance two separate elements. And hopefully, as the card game progresses, I'm going to refine that concept into something concrete, and then you'll be able to see what I mean when I say that. The second of the three important things to note when you're creating a homemade trading card game or a trading card game in general, I think, is your theme. So theme is very important. This can come in the form of what lore you're using, what different types of characters or what they're going to look like, what universes you're going to take from if it's going to be a licensed card game. Theme is very important, and theme is going to lead, it really influences not only the first element I talked about, design, but in the end, theme also influences the third element, which is going to be the scene. So I think it's really important. It probably should be number one on the list, but here we are. So theme in card games like, say, Flesh and Blood, which I already said earlier, and it's probably going to come up once more in this video. But the theme of that card game is very edgy, sort of dark and broody in a way. I'm sure there's some fantastical light, not bubbly, but light and sort of bright aspects to the game, obviously. But still, the overarching theme is going to be something like Lord of the Rings, which I'm not going to say is unkid friendly, but in the end, you're not going to show your little 3-year-old little brother or friend or whatever, not friend, but your 3-year-old like son or little brother or family member. You're not going to show them Flesh and Blood and say, oh, wow, look how cool this game is. Most people aren't going to do that. It sort of fills the same space as Mortal Kombat in that sort of sense. And though, yeah, I get a lot of kids play these games, but generally the theme is not really arcing or rather going in that direction. It's going for more teenagers to young adults to be playing these games. So that being said, what type of theme do I want? So, like I said, it can also go into lore of the card game, because usually the lore of the card game is going to decide the theme of the universe that you're basing this card game off of, which is going to decide the theme of the card game in general. So, what sort of ideas of characters do I want this card game to be about? So, I think an underrepresented idea, an underrepresented theme in card games in general is going to be sci-fi. And I don't mean Star Wars. Star Wars is obviously not over, but extremely represented in card games, but I'm talking about the more robotic aspects of sci-fi, and there's very few card games that focus solely on sci-fi in its highest form. Robots fighting, technology everywhere, stuff like that. There's very few card games that do that. Obviously, there are some. I'm not saying there aren't, like Netrunner, but that's obviously not running anymore. But there's card games in the past who did that. But I don't think there's many card games, especially nowadays, who want to focus on that. Most card games want to focus on monsters like a Pokemon or Yu-Gi-Oh type card game, or they want to focus on fantasy like Flesh and Blood or Magic the Gathering. And then there's also really, I end up putting this in its own theme section, because in the end it usually ends up becoming its own theme, which is going to be like an anime-ish theme. And that sounds like, oh wow, the anime means a lot of things, but in the end it usually ends up meaning something very specific when it comes to card games. Dragons, robots, and stuff like that, but that sort of anime style that really Yu-Gi-Oh fits more in that theme scene than the monsters scene, whereas Pokemon and stuff like Digimon fit into that one over there. So, like I said, not every card game is very strict in what its theme is, and Yu-Gi-Oh is a prime example of how you can be all over the place with your theme of your card game, but at the same time, I think it's very important to decide what my theme is going to be. So, like I said, I want to have strong sci-fi elements, but I also realize that sometimes the reason sci-fi card games are unrepresented is probably because they're not exactly the most exciting thing to look at and to play with. That being said, I don't want to lose sci-fi elements. I want it to be robotic in design. So I want to add that in there, but I want to add something else that has a strong place in my heart, and I think it's represented in card games, but it's not really strongly represented in card games as much as I'd like it to be, and that's dinosaurs. For the amount of dinosaurs that exist in the world, dinosaurs are usually like a singular archetype. They're always an archetype in every card game, yet in the end they never end up, never have I seen something really devoted to dinosaurs as a concept. And it makes sense why, but I'm just saying that it's something that's very strong, close to my heart. And the third thing I want to focus on insects. Insects are fall in the same category as dinosaurs for me because insects are very prominent in card games. Almost every different card game has their own insect archetype, but in the end of the day, nothing really focuses on insects as much as they actually could. And so out of the three different things I want to focus on my card game, and while I was just really putting this video together, I was thinking about what three things should, which one of these three themes should I decide for the card game? Insectoid theme, where every character is an insect. Dinosaur theme, which would be really cool, where every character is a dinosaur. And then there's also robots, where you play as a robot. And so I was thinking, and I came to the conclusion that this sounds wild, but I think it's very unique, and I don't think a lot of people see it coming. And I think for me, it sounds like something that I would love if I saw it in a different card game. And I think that's very important when you're creating a card game, looking for what you want to see, or creating what you want to see. And that is, add them all together. We're throwing them all into one big blender, we're spitting out something new. So we have robots or sci-fi, high sci-fi, and then we have dinosaurs and we have insects. And I think I want to have a mixture of those three concepts. A design space where you have sort of a monsterish creature, but it's going to end up looking like a dinosaur and an insect of some kind. And then it's also going to be robotic, and the lasers and stuff like that. And so yeah, in the end, it's probably going to end up looking a little bit like Digimon. But honestly, I'm fine with that. The third of the 3 points that I mentioned is going to be the scene of your card game. And I don't mean the in-universe scene, I mean the out-universe scene, the metagame. How people are going to perceive the game, and how, when I say, okay, you like a competitive game, a competitive card game, maybe you should play something like Flesh and Blood. The Flesh and Blood scene is mostly competitive. And now, obviously, there's casual players, and there's players who just collect the cards. And for any card game, those scenes are going to exist. But for Flesh and Blood, its biggest scene, its biggest draw is going to be the competitive scene. Something like Sorcery TCG, its biggest scene is going to end up being casual, kitchen table type play. I'm going to play with my family every Saturday night if I get the chance, or things like that. And depending on the card game, its scene can change. Pokemon's biggest scene is probably the collector scene. A lot of people buy Pokemon cards, but they don't play the game. So at the end of the day, Pokemon's biggest scene is probably going to be its collector scene. So what about my card game? What type of scene do I want for my card game? Well, I can only hope to decide to curate a scene when I'm going into the card game, but at the end of the day, sadly, the scene won't be up to me as the creator, because I don't have a lot of money to spend and say, "Oh, come play my game," like something like Battle Spirit Saga. So I won't be able to just cultivate that sort of scene. I also don't have the ability to create and tweak every card so that it can be very balanced and every game mechanic to make it very strategical. And so I won't be able to cultivate a very competitive scene. I won't be able to do it easily, rather. And so I'm not going to try to rack my brains in ways I can create the perfect scene, the perfect community around my card game. But I can hope and I can dream. And I think my favorite type of scene is the type of scene where it is competitive in the sense that people are trying their best to win, but casual in the sense that anybody can come and they can play the game and they can have a fun time even if they're not the best player. And some card games aren't really friendly to that sort of game design. Something like Yu-Gi-Oh! It's very not new player friendly, and quite frankly, if I'm a new player who comes in with this starter deck I bought, thinking that I might be able to have some fun, and I play against one of the competitive decks in the tournament, I'm going to get just absolutely washed out. Now, does that mean that I want my card game to be, oh wow, I can just play the dumbest deck, I can just pick up any random deck and I can beat the world's best deck? No, I want there to be levels, I want there to be stages, I want there to be strategic depth to the card game, but at the end of the day, I can't exactly control all of that, and I don't think I'm going to be able to put enough time, enough effort into to do so. So when it comes to the scene, I'd like it to have a nice competitive scene. I like it to say that there's a sales ceiling. After you play enough times, you can get better at the card game. But at the end of the day, I don't want it to be such a disparity between new players and old players. And I know that sounds like the generic thing that every card game designer is probably saying. But the exact scene, that sounds like the perfect scene for any card game, where the top players can feel like they've accomplished something, but the bottom players still feel like not only is there some place for me to go, but at the same time, I'm having fun while I'm at the bottom. And so I can only hope to create such a perfect scene, such a perfect ideal place for my players to play my card game. And quite frankly, I'm not sure if I'm going to reach that desired goal, but I know I'm going to try. And I think it's really up to the players and you, the viewers, who are going to come in here, and you guys are going to take the card game to whatever level you personally feel like you want to. Which is why I encourage you guys to subscribe and stay tuned for the future videos. Put in the comment section below different ideas and different concepts you'd like to see in the card game, and be as interactive as possible so we can build some sort sort of community around this concept, this idea, this journey, and so that it can be fun for all of us. I hope to see you guys in the next video, whether that be another video in this series or a different type of card game video such as Universal Reverse System 2 PCG. I hope to see you guys there, and I hope to see you guys excited to play card games.